2.5 million people who have tested positive for coronavirus, and approximately 171,000 people have died. I pause to note that figure because 170,000 people roughly is the population of St. Lucia. There's give or take a few thousand people, but that's roughly the population of St. Lucia where I live. We have 211 countries that have closed down completely due to the virus. And yesterday, the price of a barrel of oil was in negative territory at some approximately $36, meaning that producers of oil were paying people to take their barrels or giving oil away. The World Bank expects that COVID-19 will increase the number of poor people in the Caribbean and Latin America by 18% to 220 million people, which is a staggering number. And the number of people in extreme poverty is expected to increase by 23.3 million people. I will just pause here for a moment for you to consider those figures. 170,000 people have died. 220 million people in total the number of poor people in the Caribbean and Latin America will be increased to 220 million, and some 23.3 million people will be in extreme poverty. The world estimates that at approximately 1.6 billion children are at home due to the virus, and most of whom are attempting to do or engage in homeschooling. And the telecoms industry alone is estimated to lose revenues in the order of billions of dollars in 2020. And those figures are relative to the Caribbean accurate in terms of the estimate of the losses we are looking at. Regionally, of course, CANTO members are committing to keep their countries connected during the fight against COVID-19. And I'm very proud to say, as chairman of CANTO, that all of our members are at the front lines in the fight against COVID-19 by helping to support our countries and our societies with social distancing, working from home, and supporting governments with other measures. On the chat this morning, we are hoping to have the Honorable Minister, Mr. Fayval Williams, who is the Minister of Energy, Science and Technology in the Government of Jamaica, and also the Honorable Minister Melford Nicholas, who's the Minister of Information, Broadcasting, Telecommunications and Information Technology in the Government of Antigua and Barbuda. And we intend just to have a conversation with them about how COVID-19 has impacted their countries and about their reliance as a government and as countries on technologies and on telecoms operators to keep their countries going during this, as I say, unprecedented time. I apologize for the late start. We are awaiting both our ministers to attend, and I'm sure you can appreciate that as people who are extremely busy, matters will sometimes arise which will keep them back. We have allocated approximately 45 minutes for our session, and I would like to ask everyone to please mute your microphones and submit your questions via the Zoom chat until we can take some questions. I will ask the ministers a series of questions for 20 to 25, perhaps 30 minutes, depending on the time we have, their own interest, and after which we will open the floor to questions from the audience, and hopefully have a lively and interesting conversation. In the meantime, I encourage you to think about some questions you might like to ask of these ministers yourselves, and perhaps to even start submitting them now. Can I just check with the Secretariat whether Minister Williams or Minister Nicholas have been able to join us as yet?
Here, Chairman, and Minister Williams will join shortly. Welcome, Minister Nicholas.
Well, Welcome, Minister Nicholas. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you very
Minister,
much.
I think,
yes, I just recognized I had my mic muted. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here with this conversation that we're about to have. So good morning all, and I trust that everyone is safe in their respective countries.
Good morning, Minister. Morning. Very, very happy to have you. Shall we wait a minute or two for Minister Williams, and then if not, then perhaps, given your busy schedule, we can proceed, and perhaps if she joins us in train, we can start asking her some questions. Is that okay with you?
Morning, the balance of the morning to be with you, David. So it's your call.
Oh, thank you very much, Minister. So, team, let's give Minister Williams just a few minutes to join, and then if not, we can proceed. But Minister, just before, I don't know whether you heard my brief preamble, but I was just reviewing a few figures, not many, but let me just repeat a few of them again, just to bring everyone up to speed. So we are looking at an estimated number of deaths in the region of 171,000 people, give or take a few thousand people. That's the entire population of St. Lucia, not including the diaspora. We're looking at 1.6 billion children at home, not in full-time schooling as a result of the pandemic. 211 countries have completely shut down. The World Bank is estimating that extreme poverty in the Caribbean and Latin America is expected to increase by some 23.3 million people. And of course, among some of the most amazing statistics is that the price of oil was in negative territory yesterday, which I can freely confess, I never imagined in my lifetime I would hear something like that. We truly are in unprecedented times. Of course, those figures are terrifying in many ways when you think that, when you consider that every one of those deaths is every one of those persons that have been recorded as having died is someone's family member, someone's father, someone's loved one. It's taking a terrible toll on us globally, Minister.
Indeed, and these are sobering figures, and it's the race and the fight is really within our own respective countries, is to ensure that we put mitigation measures in place to enable us to utilize the jargon of the crisis thus far, to flatten the curve and to avoid the rate of infection to go beyond our inherent capacity to manage in the health system. I think there was a certain inevitability to the virus reaching our shores in the Caribbean, given our open economies and our dependence on tourism. But once that had happened, it was the mitigation measures. So I think really, much of the effort has been placed in terms of getting the resources, material resources, and getting the infrastructure up to par. Certainly planning for a worst case scenario, but hoping to mitigate it in any instance. And I think that the majority of the effort, certainly in my country, has been based on trying to educate the public in terms of making that behavioral change. And I think we've seen some degree of progress in that respect. The initial wave of persons being affected seem to have topped out for the time being, but we're not going to relax on our laurels, and we are anticipating a situation where, if it does rekindle, then certainly we have the means of identifying and isolating and treating, and of course limiting a further spike in the spread of the virus. And I guess we're all waiting for that moment when some type of vaccine becomes available that allows for persons to develop immunity to it. And it's only then I think we'll be able to breathe a sigh of relief so far as the threat from COVID is concerned. But of course, one of the things that we are currently having to deal with is how do we continue to manage the affairs of government with significant holes being punctured into the revenue streams of government. And so that really is the one part of the equation that we're not, coping with, the way we would like. It's really going to require a global review of how we deal with debt and financing and budgetary management in this particular period of time. Of course, we don't know. It's not an abbreviated period. We can't say it's 6 months. We don't know. And so that is for us in government, and I see my colleague minister joining from Jamaica. For us in government, it's a terrible equation, but we have to manage it as best we can going forward.
Minister, what you've said about the pressures that governments are under is truly it's sobering. Just in the last 24 hours in St. Lucia, there has been some discussion about possibly having to cut the salaries of public servants. But before I invite you to respond to that, please let me take the opportunity to welcome Minister Williams. Minister Williams, thank you so much for joining us. We are indeed extremely pleased that you were able to set a bit of time aside from your very busy schedule to speak with us today. It's a pleasure. I have not met you in person, but it's a pleasure to meet you online nonetheless. Thank you very much for joining and welcome to CANTO Conversations.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So, Minister Williams, perhaps I can start with you a little bit, given that I've just been chatting with Mr. Nicholas a little bit, and the conversation about the fiscal pressures that the government is under and the toll that COVID-19 is taking on our Caribbean societies, economically, socially, and educationally and otherwise, are significant. Can I invite you to tell us a little bit about Jamaica and how the pandemic has impacted Jamaica thus far?
Sure. So on March 10th was the day that we had our first case in Jamaica. Prior to that, we were watching the rest of the world and making our preparations. So you can imagine that when our Ministry of Health announced that we had a case, how we all had to, get to attention in terms of what we needed to do. To say that it has turned our society upside down is an understatement, because as you can imagine, we're into the 6th or 7th week of it, and many persons have had to be staying at home as much as possible. Those who can work from home are doing so. Businesses have to be operating with severely reduced hours, reduced number of employees. School has been out since then, and we have been trying our best to ensure that online schooling happens. It's happening for the majority of the students. At last check, when we did a survey through the Ministry of Education, it was revealed that maybe about 25–30% of the students did not have any access at all to online. And so you can imagine what a gap that is. And, just right, I was late getting onto this call because I was speaking with some of our communications providers to see how best we can get those students something, whether it be just on their television, since they don't have internet access or so, but something to get them involved in getting some education as well. The pressures in terms of the fiscal is significant. If you look at the revenue side already, just because we're not moving around, we're not driving. Revenues that would have come from just our consumption of oil, and those have been cut dramatically because there's a GCT charge on fuel and SCT, special consumption tax as well, so that's down significantly. Remittance is down. Our tourism sector, gosh, it's non-existent right now. So all, maybe 95% of the workers are off. We've had to close the little corner bars, and while I don't know how that is in other countries, but I know in Jamaica, a lot of persons survive with their corner shops and corner bars. And the social distancing and the limitation on crowds has really impacted that sector. We were fortunate enough to have had some resources to have been able to put forward a COVID compassionate package that allowed the government to give some amount of resource to the tourism sector, to small businesses, and then to persons who are unemployed in general. So for example, with regards to the unemployed, the COVID compassionate grant would give each person who is eligible 10,000 Jamaican dollars, which is, maybe a little less than $100 US. One-time grant, small, but when you consider that persons are unemployed, it's something that can help them to tide over for some period of time. So that was recently launched. There was quite a bit of take up to that. So now they're combing through the data to ensure that persons who are employed didn't sign up for it, and so on. And I'd expect in a week or so we'll begin the disbursement. So the pressures on the fiscal is huge, it's real, and it's coming from all different sources. In terms of the psychology, the emotion of the Jamaican people, so far, things have been orderly. We have our security forces that they're out to ensure that curfews are observed. There's an area of the country where there's a lockdown because last week it was announced that we had just a big surge from our BPO sector, business process outsourcing, and that has pushed or doubled our numbers within a matter of a week or two. And so we've had to really lock down that parish where the BPO numbers are concentrated. And so the Ministry of Health is in there testing, doing their contact tracing, and so on. So that area of town is locked down pretty much with restricted movement in and out and within that area. It was only yesterday that the Prime Minister announced in a revision in the measures, tighter measures. There's an island-wide curfew that is on, and the hours were increased yesterday. Our borders are still closed. It was only yesterday that the protocol was announced for Jamaicans who want to come back home. They would have to be tested. They'd have to be quarantined in a government facility. They'd have to be met at the airport and transported there, and so on, just to keep things contained. Because when we started in terms of how this all happened, it was because of visitors, Jamaicans who came to visit family and so on. So there's been quite a bit of focus and concentration on ensuring that we contain to as best as possible the spread, even though where we are right now, we're in the community spread of the disease. We know that this is going to be a long haul. And our best efforts are on trying to contain it so that our health system can manage, the persons who need access to the healthcare system. So that's the mode we're in right now. I think we're going to have to even hunker down some more to see how we can continue to have some form of economic activity while at the same time ensuring that the health care of all Jamaicans is preserved. And so the Prime Minister loves to say that we are trying to balance lives and livelihood. We don't want to shut down businesses. We don't want to shut down the economy. But it's a balancing act. It's a tight balancing act that we're trying to engineer here in Jamaica. So I hope that gives you a flavor.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister. That's quite a detailed, picture, and we know that the Caribbean is full of resilient people. We know that the Jamaican people are resilient, and we will all get through this. Minister Nicholas, can I invite you to paint a similar picture for Antigua? Can you let us know how your government is managing during this crisis?
Well, yes, indeed. And again, good morning, Fayval. I'm happy to see you again,
yes.
Even though we're separated by space and water. But here we are. The build-up our situation almost mirrors what happened in Jamaica. Our first case was announced on the 10th of March as well. Within the past 7 weeks, we have seen our numbers tick upwards to 23. We have had 3 persons dying thus far, all are males. And we have at least 4 of those persons who are currently on ventilators in our main public hospital. We have seen so far 7 persons who have gone through the whole cycle and are in recovery now. So 7 persons who have been retested have shown that they have, they're not showing any further signs of the virus, either the symptoms or the presence of the virus in the symptoms. So that's encouraging. We too have had to go through the whole process of a curfew. We started initially with a limited curfew from 8 in the evening till 6 the following morning. And once we had a significant uptick, we were obliged to move towards a 24-hour lockdown. But we allowed a window of 5 hours whereby persons could access certain shops and stores to get necessary supplies with food and medicine and fuel. That had initially been met with some degree of alarm because I think as the numbers were reduced, the number of hours, contact hours with businesses were reduced, persons invariably flocked to these places of business when they were opened for business, which defeated the whole purpose of the exercise. So they were not practicing the social distancing regulations as we had wanted. So there was some concern. And I think with an enhanced media campaign, what we did get that the public broadcasting system joined forces with all of the other media houses. And we created a media forum where we agreed to jointly promote the tenets of needing to change the behavior in terms of how people gathered socially and how people responded. Even the whole issue of wearing masks, it became a mandate for going out in the public last week. We have seen a significant degree of compliance by the community. We had a particular challenge over the 7-week period because initially we did not have the capacity to do localized testing. So we were reliant upon the services of CAFA in Trinidad. And even in that environment, we could do only a limited degree of tests per week because we were not the only country in the Caribbean that were utilizing CAFA services. So we had up to 20 samples that we could send in any given week to CAFA. And so that limited our ability to test as wide as possible a swath of persons as we would like. So we were limited to testing persons only who were showing symptoms. And as we all know, that there is a possibility, a very high probability that there are persons who can remain asymptomatic but still carry the virus and have the capacity to shed it. So even in this environment where we have now gotten to the point where our laboratory has been equipped and certified, and our laboratory technicians are now being trained by PAHO, we believe that towards the end of this week, or certainly during the new week, we will have the full capacity to do localized testing. I'm sure that you would be aware that getting supplies, reagents, masks, PPE, ventilators, this had been a bit of a challenge because there was a global demand for these products. And of course, our friendly neighbor in the north took a decision that they were going to confiscate as much as they could some of these equipment and resources, even when they were already purchased. I cite the case of Barbuda and Rihanna's gift to the government of Barbados. So within that kind of milieu, we had to struggle a bit, but I think we were eventually able to get to the position where we had the resources and we are now doing the training. With the ability to do localized testing, I believe the Minister of Health has indicated last week that it is intended that whenever people are quarantined or whenever the contact tracing exercises indicates that a person would have been exposed to a person who has become positive, then it will become a requirement for those persons to be tested. And that would be a change from what we had been doing by testing only persons who showed symptoms. So in as much as we have seen a balance now for 11.5 of the numbers at 23, and that number has held steady for the past 5 days, we do not think that we're out of the woods. We are encouraged by the fact that we have not seen the spike. I don't think we have reached a stage yet where we can say definitively that we have any degree of community contamination where we are. All of the cases that we have identified have been traced back to persons who would have visited the island or persons who would have traversed abroad and would have returned to it. So I think we are encouraged by where we are. Again, we're not resting on our laurels. The curfew has continued. We had gone to Parliament earlier last month and had gotten the resolution in Parliament to implement a state of emergency for 60 days. And within that 60-day period, the government, through the cabinet, is able to impose these curfew restrictions. And we are still in the 24-hour curfew environment. I anticipate that it is going to continue for the next week and towards the end of the month. And I believe if the numbers remain steady, we may fall back to a less restrictive curfew period, but we're still not going to allow the society to fall back into the old pattern of congregating. So all of the social distancing requirements will still continue. The need for wearing masks will continue. We will still have public education, encouraging persons to observe the new hygiene requirements. We have seen a number of stores who have actually come to the conversation. They have implemented measures at the front of their stores where they have provided tubs and water and other type of hygiene equipment and resources to enable our patrons to continue to practice both going into and coming out of the stores. So this is all encouraging. And so from a health standpoint, those are the measures that are in place and we're encouraged by that. But as Fayval would have indicated, it comes at an economic cost. The reduction in government's revenue is the most significant economic impact. But I think to the number of persons who are now getting into the unemployment line, that's going to spell some degree of pain for them. And of course, we are putting some compassionate measures in place as well. The government, through the Ministry of Social Transformation, have developed and designed certain food packages to take care of the needy, especially for mothers, the elderly, persons with disabilities, and persons who have been in the hotel sector in particular, who have lost their jobs. We are looking to provide a degree of amelioration for those persons. We have gotten the commercial banks on board. Even last night, my own commercial bank indicated via an email that they are prepared to work with persons to put a furlough on the payment of mortgages or loans, at least for 3 months in the case of loans and 6 months in the case of mortgages. In the case of credit cards, I think that they're allowing for minimum payments and that like. So we have gotten the support of the commercial banks. We have asked landlords to be particularly sensitive and have asked them to allow the remaining 3 months to allow persons to have some breathing space, some fiscal space. Insofar as the public utilities are concerned with electricity, we have control over that facility. So we have given a mandate to the utility that there should be no disconnections over the next 3 months, as we anticipate, hopefully, an improvement in the overall fiscal and economic position. Insofar as government revenues are concerned, we have lost 70% of our revenues that we would normally be enjoying at this particular point in time, directly and indirectly from tourism. We have suspended the payment of a number of these loans and a number of rents that the government would normally have to be able to create some fiscal space for the government. But even in that, it's a small measure, and we're still going to have to find the means to get what we would call budgetary support to cope with the crisis over the next 5 to 6 months. Beyond that, I believe the measures that you hinted at this morning, David Cox, would be a last degree option for the government to go back to the public service and to ask them to take a haircut. The reason why that is going to be the last measure is that we recognize that a significant portion of the population do work for the government. And the last thing that we want to do is to collapse aggregate demand. So we want to ensure that persons still have an income that they can continue to keep that portion of the economy that can remain buoyant. We want to keep that afloat. And so we have to now look towards the possibility as to when the COVID crisis abates, that we are looking at a COVID recovery. And we have already begun to put in place a multi-sector, a multi-party, multi-stakeholder committee, a commission, if you would, to work with government in planning that future beyond the COVID crisis abating. So we have put these measures in place. And again, it's a turbulent time. The one thing I would say, and I know it's of interest here, persons who have to stay at home and work from home, the student population who are at home, the teachers. Again, this is a particular problem because it represents a strain on the telecommunications infrastructure. The 3 telecoms operators in Antigua have indicated that they are at an optimum level of usage. And of course, consumers have begun to complain about the quality of service because more demand is being placed on the networks at this particular point in time. We're learning to operate in new measures. The government itself has moved towards operating virtually. The cabinet for the last, I would say, 3 weeks have met only in a virtual environment. We even had one session of Parliament at the end of last month where we actually had a sitting of the Lower House of Assembly virtually. I think it would have been the first time anywhere in the Caribbean that would have been attempted, and it was done successfully. And I believe those are some of the measures. Lower down in the organization, the permanent secretaries are beginning as well to utilize virtual means such as the one we're using now to work and to collaborate. And I think this is going to be the new normal to come.
Thank you, Minister. That paints a sobering again and very detailed picture of Antigua and Barbuda. I want to ask Minister Williams about the relationship of the government to technology and its reliance on technology at this time. Minister Nicholas just pointed to some of the specific things that his government has had to do. How has the government of Jamaica relied on technology during this time, and how would you say the telecoms industry has stepped up to support your efforts since the crisis began?
Sure. Well, prior to the crisis, the mandate from the government or objective has always been to become a digital society. We always knew as well that would take time. But going into the crisis, we saw our 2 major telecom providers, and there are some other ones, but we have 2 major ones, really tried in terms of the service that they're providing, considering that prior to the pandemic, they were managing networks that, in my opinion, were inadequate, and I've said this many times. So you can imagine layering on top of that all the persons who have to work from home and the additional demand among students and so on. So you can imagine the impact on the quality of service. One of the major telecom providers reported that they've seen upwards of 25–30% increase in demand over their historic peak. So it's a lot of data demand, video demand that they're seeing in the network. The government has stepped up to help to facilitate by making some of the government's emergency spectrum available to the providers, at least for the period of the COVID, the more intense part of the COVID pandemic. And that has probably eased, eased things up a bit. Additionally, we asked the telecom providers to make available to students, especially tertiary students, free access to the various educational websites that they want to be on, because data payment for data is a bit onerous for students, and so we asked the tertiary students, we asked their leadership to identify those important websites, and agreed with the telecom providers that they would provide those zero rated, meaning no charge for those. So we've tried to help in terms of education in that way. We've been encouraging persons to use online services, especially banking services, rather than, waking up and trying to find your way to a bank or a remittance company. Begin to do more online. We've been encouraging supermarkets to make their items available online so that there can be more ordering and people can probably pick up once they go to the supermarket or have it delivered to them. Just to say, we are not nearly as digital as we would like. And the COVID situation has laid bare, that fact. We wish we were more digital, but we're not. So we have to redouble our efforts to ensure that we have the kind of broadband connectivity across the length and breadth of Jamaica to allow communities wherever they are to have the access that we would like them to have. We have a number of different solutions in the marketplace. We have new providers that are looking to come in, but all of that is to come. It's not here just yet. The government itself has an ambition to have for itself its own private secure network to connect all ministries, departments, and agencies, all of local government, all hospitals, all police stations, all community centers, all schools, and so on. Again, some of that is happening, but not nearly enough. And so the work continues even through, as we experience this crisis, we are continuing the work. I had several conversations this morning to see if we can just move things along to get this implemented. We do have within government an entity called eGov, which is primarily tasked with ensuring that government has connectivity and it has the necessary technology available to it. That entity itself is in transition to become the ICT authority for government, the one voice in government to ensure that there is interoperability among all the different entities to ensure that purchases are streamlined and we get out of each ministry, department, and agency doing what it is that they want to do, so that there is some interoperability, there's some uniformity, and there's efficiency in purchasing. Early days yet for that entity, they're just transitioning. Additionally, we're taking on trying to put in place a data protection regime. Or the laws were completed. We have a bill that was laid in Parliament, needs to be discussed and move through the process to implementation, because that is one of the building blocks for us for our national identification system. And we figure that once we implement the national identification system, it will be much easier for persons to have bank accounts, to be able to do online transactions, and so on. So we're approaching it from a number of different fronts, not just the physical connectivity that people need to have, but also looking at the needs of government, how government can get more of its services online, what is the infrastructure that government itself needs to have, what it is that the citizens need to have, so that in the end, you have government offering the services online, and you have the citizens who are enabled to be able to take advantage or to be able to begin and complete those services online. It's a task that is ahead of us. We have a lot of digitization that needs to happen in terms of the records within government. It's going to take us maybe 2 or 3 years. It's a concentrated effort to get that done. But our plans have been laid out, and we are moving ahead implementing. We're just sorry that we have to go through this COVID period here right now, but anyhow, what it has done is bring that concept home to every Jamaican in terms of the need for not just government, but businesses to be more online. And so you can imagine that all businesses are looking to see how they can accelerate that process, so that in the event that we ever have to go through some other pandemic down the road, businesses will have that experience, and they would have put the infrastructure in place already to be able to have a seamless utilization or transition to that mode. So long-winded way of saying it's our goal that we have in mind in terms of the digitization of the country. We are just at the beginning phases in terms of where we want to go versus where we are. We can do quite a bit online, but not nearly enough when we look at the experience of other countries and what they are able to do online. We are, we're at the beginning of the phase of that, of getting to that point.
Thank you very much. Now, at this point, I'm just conscious of the time, and ministers, I know that both of you are very busy, and we're very privileged to have your time. Is it possible that you can stay with us for a few more minutes, perhaps for 10 or 15 more minutes, just so that we can hopefully close off this conversation with just one more question from me, and then take a few questions from our audience. Is that okay with both of you?
Okay, a few more minutes. Sure.
Good.
Thank you very much. I just have one last question, really, and that is about the telecoms industry in your countries. I am sure you will agree that at this time, when it is crucial for people to stay at home, that the telecoms industry and operators specifically are playing a fairly critical role in supporting the fight against COVID-19. Operators are affected and impacted by the pandemic as all other industries. But I just want to share with you some of the things that operators are doing around the region. Most critically, almost all of CANTO's membership have pledged or committed in some way to keeping people connected during the crisis. So operators are doing that in different ways, but more or less, we understand that people may not have the same ability to pay, but we're keeping people connected to our networks. We're having to make investments in the network to expand offshore capacity and to make sure that people can enjoy a reasonable quality of service during this incredible time of demand. So we're actually having to spend a significant amount of money in a number of markets, and that's all operators are having to do that. We're having to develop new lifeline type products to keep people who are just in no position to pay for several months, but who have to remain connected to the internet for their jobs, for their schooling, etc. And we're having to figure out ways in which to extend the networks to get services to people who are underserved and underconnected at a time when the public is just not in the same position as it was to pay previously. Some 70% of CANTO's membership revenues are paid in cash for most members of CANTO. And CANTO members report that revenues for their services, for their operations are down by over 60 to 70% in some cases. Ministers, I want to ask, do you think that given the critical role that operators are playing at this time to support our societies, make sure people are connected, expand service, do you foresee a time for some support to be provided to operators when all is said and done? What are your views on that, and what are some of the things you think government may be in a position to do to assist operators with the losses that they have had to endure during this very difficult period?
So a question, when you say operators, you're talking about the telecom providers?
Yeah. Yes, Minister.
Okay. Well, in Jamaica, I know, as I said earlier on, the telecom providers have been reporting increased demand. You know, they're one of the few sectors that can report that. So I don't think for them it's a matter of revenues at all. So maybe I'm just not sure of the question. I know that one thing that we have been looking at, and this is even pre-COVID, was looking at the fees that the Spectrum Management Authority charges to the telecom sector. We just did a significant study looking at how we can bring greater efficiencies to how Spectrum is managed, and looking at our pricing for Spectrum. So that's an area that is going to move forward with some, you know, modernization to it that will help the telecom providers in terms of their, you know, connectivity, in terms of their network. So that's one big effort from government, is the review of fees for Spectrum.
Thanks, Minister. Just to clarify, we have seen operators are noting across the board an increase in the demand for an increase in the level of traffic, that is data traffic traversing their networks. But at the same time, people's capacity to pay is significantly reduced. And you know, operators have lost major accounts, etc. Customers simply don't have the ability to pay their bills. So we have noted a significant reduction in the revenues, the fees, the collections that they are able to make at a time when people are more reliant on our services. Minister Nicholas, to you, your thoughts on the support that the industry may require at some point?
Well, I think the industry may have to define what are those areas of support that they would like to see incrementally. Like Fayval said, we have observed as well that there has been an uptick in demand for these services. What I can say, in the case where we've had the curfew period implemented and where we have opened up this window of opportunity, I am aware, having worked in the industry before, that a good percentage of your consumer business is on prepaid. and a number of your indirect sales would take place through retail vendors in village shops and supermarkets and service marts. So where these have been closed, I think it creates a bottleneck for persons to be able to replenish. And so this question has been posed to me. So either we're under our curfew conditions, the telecommunications operators enjoyed an essential service privilege that they could continue to be open to the public within that window of a permissive window of opportunity of operation. They were allowed to, sell retail services to the market in that particular way. But I'll go further to say that always, and it has been from the time I've been involved more than 30 years ago in telecommunications, that the telecommunications companies, insofar as they're doing any capital expansion, any improvement to their networks, have always enjoyed favorable capital incentives in those particular realms, and those will continue. If there are any other areas that the operators may need in a particular situation, I think there is only fair that they should ask. One thing I would say, though, is that in Antigua, we have had a peculiar environment for telecommunications because, in as much as it is one of the top 3 industries globally, the government of Antigua and Barbuda, certainly since I've been a minister, have enjoyed very little by way of contribution to the treasury from the operations of telecoms. And it's a situation that we met. There were certain bilateral agreements that were arrived at between the previous administration and the telecoms operators, and we have had to see them to the end. I believe that some of the operators, at least 2 of the operators, have only now become liable for corporate income taxes again as of last year. Some are, at least one of them, are still enjoying considerable concessions in respect of spectrum and license fees. And so the government has foregone those opportunities. We did not forcefully come back into the equation and to say, listen, we wanted to rescind those arrangements. We honored them. And so I think that the telecoms operators in Antigua have had some halcyon days. So in as much as you're not seeing the type of collections, and I think I've worked in the operations of these organizations before, the revenue position is still strong. And I think that there is an opportunity for you to recover some of those collections down the road. But again, I'm not closing out the possibility of having a conversation. I would like to know with some degree of specificity, what are those other measures that they would like the government to look at, and we will look at them on merit. And if it is something that we can do to gain further access, here's where we would like to get some additional support. I think I would like to echo the sentiments, and we are thankful that here in Antigua, the operators have come on board and have provided zero-rated access to a number of educational sites to support this education and the children at home. We're appreciative of that. We'd like to see some packages done for the teachers in the public service, because they're now having to operate from home, and the strain is on them as well. And they have never been in the higher income portion of the public service. So there are a number of things that we could do. And if we wanted to have that conversation, I would certainly have some bells and whistles that I would like to add to the package as well. But we understand this is an environment where everyone has to have some skin in the game. And we're not precluding the possibility of having that conversation. But we do understand that this is an unprecedented time, and it's something that we're going to have to keep talking. And I imagine there's going to be a space for the telecoms operators in that post-COVID commission that deals with the economic resuscitation of the country. Telecommunications is going to play an important part in it. I have to say that when I heard Fayval speaking a while ago about her challenge in moving towards digitization of Jamaica, we could easily switch jobs, Fayval, because I remember when I first met you, might have been in Suriname, where we had this conversation about the single ICT space that has been at the tip of the CARICOM and the CTU. This is almost like a dream come true. I had a conversation earlier this week, late last week, sorry, with Secretary General Bernadette Lewis, and we both opined how this COVID crisis has ushered in the need for 21st century government. It is something that has been on the agenda for the CTU since 2018. We had a conference here in Antigua speaking about that in January of 2018. And now here we are, seeing very clearly, it's been forced upon us that our old method of doing business with brick and mortar exclusively has come under real test and real scrutiny. So it's like a dream come true, and I think it's more than just having the organization. It's having real resources to be allocated to solve that particular equation, to get governments lined up, to get the private sector lined up to deal with the whole parameters of moving towards a digital society. And that's going to spell issues for us as well with security and cybersecurity and all the other trappings that come along with it. So it's an important time. We want to work with everyone, and we appreciate the conversation that we're having now, and we'll continue to have with the telecoms operators and the CANTO membership.
Thank you very much. If we could just take a few questions from the audience. I know they've been waiting patiently, and I'd just like to invite the Secretary General, please, to bring up any questions that we may have received for the ministers, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We have quite a few questions from the audience, but in the essence of time, we'll go through just two of them. So can the ministers tell us if they are seeing any increase in cyber crimes with the increased online activities, and how are you dealing with it in your respective countries?
Okay, in Jamaica, I can't say that I have not gotten any report of increased cyber crimes in Jamaica. Within the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, we do have an agency called Jamaica Cyber Incidents Reporting Team that takes all reports of cyber crimes from businesses and individuals all over Jamaica and compile it, and they would send a report to the ministry. They have not alerted us to the fact that there is an extraordinary increase in that area. And I know this particular group as well, they're the ones that are in charge of ensuring that the government infrastructure is protected. And we have not really gotten any reports that they're seeing anything out of hand. Having said that, though, I know I need to probably just touch bases with the telcos, the financial sector, to hear what their experience has been.
Okay, great. Minister Nicholas?
Yeah, in the case of Antigua, I have not had reported any major incidents of cybersecurity. I believe one of the telecoms operators, the local telco, APUA, has indicated that someone made an attempt at impersonating and someone would have published some mischievous press release attempting to impersonate the APU. I think they corrected that quickly, and I think that is the only major incident that I'm aware of. But other than that, in terms of any phishing incidents or any major phishing incidents, no, I have not had it reported. If it has been, then if there has been any major incident, as I said, it has not come to the ministry's attention or to the attention of any of our law enforcement agencies, which invariably would have notified my department.
Okay, we have another question here. How are ministries dealing with the work from home situation, having to get your staff ready to work from home on a short time frame?
Well, from our ministry's perspective, our permanent secretary has been in charge of communicating with all the various departments and agencies, and in itemizing which persons are essential, non-essential, what jobs can be done offline versus online. And so far, sorry, so far it's been pretty smooth. I do go into the office sometimes, obviously taking precautions in terms of wearing face masks and observing all the measures. But so far, so good. Persons have been working with it. As you can see, we've been using this facility here within the ministry, and all the meetings that I have to have, I'm online with it. I know the PS has a weekly meeting with all the other permanent secretaries. It's all done online. Cabinet, I heard the minister say they've been hosting online cabinet. We just started yesterday. So there've been some teething pains, but I'm sure we will work it all out. We haven't had any kind of major dislocation, because I think we've been very good about identifying who it is that needs to come in, who can work from home, and so on, and giving people the necessary authority and permissions that they need to work, offline or offsite, I should say.
Okay. And lastly,
I just say quickly, just like Fayval, our permanent secretaries have been charged with regulating the workflow in the instance where public services are still required to be offered. They make a determination as to who within the organization are critical to delivering those services. One of the public services that falls under my control would be the national broadcasting stations. And obviously that is a critical piece of the government's campaign against COVID, because we needed that to be able to ensure that we can communicate effectively and to educate the population. So while we have operated with reduced staff in that environment, they're still required to be out. And so within the curfew, they have been equipped with their own curfew passes. And certain measures have been put in place to provide them with meals and refreshments, because under those circumstances, the traditional avenues for getting meals and refreshments are not available. We have transportation allocated for them. But I would say since 2015, the government of Antigua has had the opportunity to operate on a platform that allowed for virtual working. I think there has been a slow take-up, but my ministry at the helm of it had been the first and been out front with it. And so I think even at this time, the adjustment for persons within my ministry, certainly the senior public servants, it has been fairly easy for them to make the adoption. And so I think now that it has been demonstrated that the cabinet has adopted this way of doing business, the permanent secretaries can do the same, and any other persons or groups that have to meet are able to do that as well. So we have that functionality, and I think we are actually seeing take up an upward tick of the persons adopting this new method of working from home. Of course, the impact is going to be on the residential internet connectivity, which is still an issue here in Antigua. And that's a matter that I have to take on board in terms of what are the necessary things that we have to do. So while we also have a government-wide area network that we are building out, and we are at the early stages of it yet, but while we're adding ministries and increasing the capacity in that network, the fact now that persons are no longer on the network, we have to now think about virtual working in an environment where we have a degree of remote access, and what we do about that equation of getting persons who have to work from home sufficiently equipped and resourced at home to be able to effect that. But it has worked well. I had looked in the chat group and had seen a number of persons have asked questions about retail stores who are offering things like printers and toners and so on to allow persons to work from home. I would say that they did not get the initial cut of support in terms of being able to be a permissible business during the 5-hour window. I have certainly been receiving queries from some of those persons, and I believe at tomorrow's cabinet meeting we will give consideration to allowing more of those businesses to operate. And I think, just like in Jamaica, we want to ensure that as many persons, so long as they're able to maintain the social distancing, can go back out and work and actually produce goods and services to bring a degree of normalcy under the prevailing conditions to everyone. So that's really our challenge at this particular point in time.
Ministers, in a post-COVID world, what are your top 3 priorities for digitalization?
Well, for us in Jamaica, a top priority is to scale up in a massive way or digitization of physical records within government, because that will enable government to be able to offer the services to its citizens, offer more of the services, so you'll be able to complete and begin and complete transactions online and so on. So that's going to be a major effort on our part coming out of this. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier on, we are transitioning to an ICT authority, one voice for ICT in government, that we have to continue to do. And then the third would be getting our physical broadband infrastructure in Jamaica for government, connecting all of its entities so that there's a secure network for government to be able to do its communications and do its work on. So those would be the top 3 for us.
Point, the top 3 would be, for me, certainly as minister leading the effort. I have already commissioned and authorized the renewal of our citizens portal. I want to be in a position that the government from henceforth, certainly towards the end of the year, should be available to persons at their fingertips by the mere click of an app on their phone or whatever mobile device that they're using. And that should be able to launch them into the citizens portal. And on that citizens portal, all of the services that they would want from the government should become available in a one window environment, not to be able to bounce around from portal to portal. So for example, we have already moved towards a digital passport. We already have the immigration services, the border entry system is already digitized. Our customs and excise division is already digitized. Our tax department is already digitized. Our land registry is digitized. Our business registry is digitized. So we want to bring all of that and all of the services. Our transport board is already digitized. So we want to bring all those services to the point where the citizen who is digitally competent can access those services. So that would be my number 1 priority, to ensure that the government is joined up for the citizen in cyberspace and it is accessible from their own device. And that is a project that my IT team is working on fastidiously, and they're working with a particular external vendor that I'm hoping that certainly before the end of the summer, COVID crisis prevailing notwithstanding, we should be able to get closer to that mark. We also have an objective of expanding the government's wide area network. We have already done some work with Cisco through one of the telecoms operators here in Antigua. But we want to expand it to ensure that once we resume business as usual, working from within the ministries, that there is sufficient capacity and we have sufficient management of that particular environment. And the third objective would be, of course, still an outstanding objective of mine is to get to a position where we have corrected the telecommunications environment. It still is woefully behind the mark. I see a smile hatching on David's face because I know he is familiar with the conditions here prevailing in Antigua. I think that has to remain as one of my top priorities as well, to get the legal and regulatory environment in Antigua to come up to par with where it is in the rest of the Caribbean, first instance.
Thank you. The region is in good hands, I think. We've heard from Ministers Williams and Minister Nicholas. Closing comments, ministers?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for this forum to allow us to highlight what it is that we're doing in our respective countries. We know that there is much to be done. We're up to the task here in Jamaica. We have the plans, and you know, again, I don't know who it was that said, let's not waste a crisis. And I think we are seeing in no uncertain terms that the country needs to move quickly to becoming more digital, more online. And I don't think there's anyone who is not seized of that knowledge now. And so the momentum should be with us as we move towards making Jamaica more fully digital.
Well, yes, I think I would like to echo the sentiments that we should not let the COVID crisis pass and the opportunity that it brings. I think the post-COVID world, the post-COVID Caribbean is going to be a better digital Caribbean. I think we're going to be more focused on that. I think each of us has a role to play. From my very arrival here in 2014, I attended the first CANTO meeting as minister back in 2014. These events and these issues have been at the top of CANTO's agenda. I will say the same thing has been within the bowels of the CTU. I have latterly become president, but I think that the CTU has blasted a way forward in terms of the 21st century government. It is upon us. We are there. We are actually feeling the pain of not complied with those requirements earlier. But I think if there was ever an opportunity that came, it was this one, because I think it forced the prime ministers to recognize that ICT can play a greater role. And I think as of in the past, where ICT ministers were suffering because they did not get the lion's share of attention or the contention of resources, I think this ushers in a new opportunity. And I think I'm happy to hear that Fayval sounds confident as much as I am, that we're going to get the type of breakthrough that we need and the type of resources that we need to make this a reality. So I'm going to continue to reach out to all of the stakeholders, to all of the partners. I'm going to miss CANTO's meeting this year. Normally up right in terms of the busy schedule, where I can duck down and have a little networking meeting and to have a little lighter time, in as much as there are lots of meetings in the wake of a CANTO meeting in the forum. But it's still an easier time where you can just focus and feel a part of a broader Caribbean undertaking. So I'll miss CANTO this year, but we all understand that we have to give way towards what this thing brings upon us. So I'm feeling confident, and hopefully we all stay safe, we all survive it, and we do what we have to do such that when the next critical crisis comes along, a pandemic comes along, we would have made certain displacements and in a much better position to mitigate at least this part of it going forward. So I remain hopeful and energized.
All right.
Ministers, thank you very much. Sorry, SG, please go ahead.
Go ahead, David. I will just close after you.
Thank you very much. Minister Williams and Nicholas, we want to say thank you so much for your time. We know that this is an incredibly busy time for both of you, but I want to assure you that the region has benefited significantly from your thoughts and your insight today. We, of course, want to let you know of our support as a community for your countries and for your government's efforts in fighting the COVID-19 crisis at this time. It is sad that we have had to cancel CANTO's annual conference this year, but I want to take the initiative and invite both of you, and especially Mr. Williams, to attend our conference in 2021, God willing, when things have returned to normal. At least we hope so. Thank you again for your patience and your understanding. And we hope that we will be able to continue this dialogue. I think it's important and beneficial to the people of the region. Thank you very much. And finally, on your family, safety, please keep safe at this very delicate time.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Williams. Minister Nicholas, just one final announcement from the Secretary General, and then we can close off for today.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you all. Thank you to the ministers and this esteemed audience. I know I did not get through to all your questions, but we will look at the chat. We will try to answer some of them, and we will refer to the respective ministers. Remember that the next webinar will be on Tuesday, 28 April at 10 a.m. Join the conversation for an industry perspective this time, dealing with COVID-19. Dr. Ronald Walcott, CEO of Telecommunications Services of Trinidad and Tobago, will be our guest, and he will discuss some leadership strategies to ensure that critical communication infrastructure remains working through this pandemic. Please follow us on our social media platforms. Our handles are on the screen. You can also view a video of this issue on our YouTube channel, CANTO. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll get all the notifications. Thank you. Stay home, stay safe, and stay connected with CANTO Conversations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for the information.
Bye, everybody.
Till next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you so much.